The day a $47 million check arrived in my mailbox, my mother laughed before she even knew what it was. My name is Ethan Walker, and for 29 years, my family had one nickname for me, the dumb one. Not the quiet one. Not the sensitive one. Just, the dumb one. It started when I was 7 and mixed up multiplication tables during a family game night. My older brother, Caleb, solved every question before anyone else. My younger sister, Nora, skipped a grade. From then on, every mistake I made became another family joke. If Ethan packed your parachute, Dad would say at barbecues, I'd stay on the plane. Everyone laughed. Even me. Because when you're the punchline long enough, you stop believing you deserve another role. I never went to an Ivy League school like Caleb. I didn't become a doctor like Nora. I worked as a maintenance technician for an apartment complex outside Columbus, fixing broken pipes, repairing elevators, replacing burned-out lights. It wasn't glamorous. But I slept well knowing I earned every dollar honestly. My parents never seemed impressed. Whenever relatives visited, Mom proudly displayed Caleb's medical awards and Nora's framed degrees. If anyone asked about me, she'd smile politely and say, Ethan is figuring things out. I had been figuring things out for nearly 30 years. Then everything changed on a rainy Tuesday morning. The envelope looked ordinary. Cream-colored. Thick. No return address except the name of a law office I'd never heard of. Inside was a formal letter. Beneath it rested something so unbelievable I thought it had to be fake. A cashier's check. $47 million. I actually laughed. Then I looked again. The amount hadn't changed. There had to be some mistake. The letter explained almost nothing. It simply requested that I contact the attorney immediately regarding the final wishes of the late Mr. Harold Bennett. I stared at the name. Harold Bennett. I didn't know anyone by that name. At least, I didn't think I did. That evening I drove to my parents' house because I honestly believed someone had stolen my identity. Mom opened the envelope before I could stop her. She glanced at the number. Then burst into laughter. Oh, Ethan, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. Who fell for an internet scam now? Dad barely looked up from the television. They'll ask for gift cards next. Caleb smirked. Nora shook her head sympathetically. You really need to be more careful. I tried explaining that the check looked authentic. That there was a law firm's phone number. That maybe someone had died and confused me with another Ethan Walker. Nobody listened. Dad handed the envelope back. You've always been too gullible. I left without eating dinner. Halfway home, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Mr. Walker? A calm woman's voice asked. Yes. This is Margaret Sloan from Sloan and Pierce Attorneys. I nearly drove off the road. We've been trying to reach you. I got your letter. I'm glad. There's been a mistake. A brief silence followed. No, she replied carefully. There hasn't. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I don't know anyone named Harold Bennett. I believe, she said, that is exactly what someone wanted you to think. The line went quiet before she added one more sentence. You should come alone. I barely slept. Every logical explanation fell apart. Wrong person? Identity theft? Some elaborate fraud? Still, curiosity won. The law office occupied the second floor of a century-old brick building downtown. Margaret Sloan looked to be in her 60s. Gray hair. Sharp eyes. Kind voice. She welcomed me into a conference room carrying a single cardboard archive box. I know this feels impossible. That's an understatement. She nodded. Mr. Bennett expected that. She slid a folder toward me. Inside was a photograph. An old one. Maybe 35 years old. It showed a smiling man standing beside my father. I blinked. No. Not just standing beside him. They had their arms around each other's shoulders like lifelong friends. I looked up. My dad never mentioned him. I'm aware. Another photograph. Dad again. This time fishing beside the same man. Another. Christmas dinner. Another. My parents at what looked like a birthday party. Every picture included Harold Bennett. Years of photographs. Years. My heartbeat grew louder. If my parents knew him. They knew him very well. Then why don't I remember him? Margaret folded her hands. Because after a certain year, they stopped talking about him. Why? I can't answer that. You just said. I said I can't. She pushed another envelope toward me. This was left specifically for you. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, handwritten in faded blue ink, were 5 words. For Ethan. When he's ready. My throat tightened. How old is this? 23 years. My fingers trembled opening it. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't another legal document. It was a birthday card. My 8th birthday. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was neat. To the smartest boy I know. I stopped reading. Smartest? Nobody had ever called me that. Not once. Not in my entire life. Margaret quietly watched me. Who wrote this? Harold Bennett. But, why? I believe you'll find that answer. She reached into the archive box and removed something wrapped carefully in brown paper. A small cassette recorder. Beside it sat 6 labeled tapes. Tape 1. Tape 2. Tape 3. All the way to tape 6. They're yours. What are they? Mr. Bennett recorded them over several years. For me? Yes. I've never even met him. Margaret looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I wouldn't be so certain. Before I could ask another question, she handed me one final document. It wasn't a will. It wasn't financial paperwork. It was a visitation log from a children's hospital. One visitor's name appeared again and again. Harold Bennett. Patient visited. Ethan Walker. Age. 7. 8. 9. 10. I stared at the pages. I had spent years in hospitals after a severe childhood illness. I remembered nurses. Doctors. My parents. But not him. Not once. Someone had been visiting me dozens of times. And I had absolutely no memory of it. Margaret stood. I think you're ready to ask your parents the questions they've avoided for over 20 years. I carefully gathered the photographs, the birthday card, and the cassette tapes into the archive box. As I reached the door, she quietly added, "Oh, there's one thing I almost forgot." She handed me a final sealed envelope. Unlike the others, this one had only 2 words written across the front. Open last. I looked up. What happens if I don't? Margaret's face became strangely serious. Then you'll never understand why Harold Bennett left $47 million to the son your own family spent a lifetime convincing was the least worthy. I carried the box to my car, staring at that final envelope, unable to decide what frightened me more. The answers waiting inside. Or the possibility that my parents had been lying to me for my entire life. Chapter 2. I didn't drive home. Instead, I pulled into the empty parking lot of an old riverside park where my dad had taught Caleb to fish. I remembered sitting on a bench nearby, too young to cast a line, watching them laugh together while Mom took pictures. I couldn't remember a single photo of just Dad and me. The archive box sat on the passenger seat. The 6 cassette tapes. The faded birthday card, the photographs. And the sealed envelope marked open last. My fingers hovered over it more than once. Then I pulled my hand away. If Harold Bennett had gone through the trouble of writing those words, I owed him enough respect to follow them. Instead, I reached for tape 1. The recorder looked ancient, but after replacing the batteries from a nearby convenience store, the machine clicked to life. A burst of static filled the car. Then a man's calm voice emerged. "If you're hearing this, Ethan, it means I'm no longer here to explain things myself." I froze. His voice wasn't dramatic. It sounded gentle. Almost familiar. "I don't know how old you'll be when you hear this. Maybe 20. Maybe 40. I only know one thing." A pause. "You deserved to know the truth years ago." My heartbeat quickened. "I'm making these recordings because memories fade. People change. Fear makes good people stay silent." Another pause. "But facts don't change." I leaned closer. "My name is Harold Bennett. I promised someone that I'd protect you, even if protecting you meant staying out of your life." The tape clicked. Silence. I frowned. That was it. Less than 2 minutes. Nothing more. Instead of answering my questions, it had created 100 new ones. Who had asked Harold to protect me? Why stay away? And why leave me millions of dollars? The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in almost 4 years. I couldn't focus on replacing light fixtures while my entire childhood suddenly felt like a story someone else had written. I drove back to my parents' house. Mom answered the door, surprised to see me again. "I thought you had work. I need to ask you something." She noticed the archive box. Her smile disappeared. "Can we come inside?" I asked. Dad was reading the newspaper. Caleb happened to be there helping install a new dishwasher. Nora arrived 20 minutes later after Mom insisted she should hear this too. The whole family sat in the living room. I placed one photograph on the coffee table. No one spoke. Dad looked at it for barely a second before folding the newspaper. "Where did you get that?" "So you do know him?" "I asked you a question." "His name was Harold Bennett." Mom's face turned pale. Caleb looked confused. Nora glanced between our parents. "I've never heard that name," she said. Neither had they. Dad stood. "Conversation's over." No. That single word surprised even me. For years I had avoided conflict. For years I accepted whatever explanation my parents gave. Not this time. I laid out more photographs. Fishing trips. Christmas dinners. Birthday parties. Every image chipped away at the story I'd been raised to believe. Mom slowly sat back down. I thought, those were gone. Gone. Not forgotten. Gone. Someone had deliberately made them disappear. Who was he? I asked quietly. Nobody answered. Was he family? Silence. A friend? Still nothing. Finally Mom whispered. He was important. Important enough to erase? Dad rubbed his forehead. It was complicated. Try me. He looked toward the window for a long time. Then he said something that made no sense. He loved you too much. The room fell silent. I laughed once, nervously. What does that even mean? Dad didn't answer. Instead, Mom spoke. When you were little. Harold visited often. I know. Her eyes widened. How? I have hospital records. She looked at Dad. Real fear crossed both their faces. Not anger. Fear. You went to the lawyer. Yes. Dad closed his eyes. I hoped you'd never find her. The words hit harder than I expected. He hadn't said, I'm glad you know the truth. He said he hoped I'd never find the person who had it. That afternoon I left with fewer answers than before. But one sentence refused to leave my mind. He loved you too much. I drove to the children's hospital listed on the visitation records. The building had been renovated, but the records department still occupied the basement. A woman named Linda searched the archives. "I'm sorry," she said. "Most records this old have been digitized." She disappeared into the back room. Nearly half an hour later she returned carrying a thin folder. "You're lucky." Inside were treatment summaries, lab reports, nursing notes. Then one page caught my eye. Approved visitors. Mother. Father. Harold Bennett. Only 3 names. No Caleb. No Nora. No grandparents. Just those 3. I frowned. Why would someone unrelated be on this list? Linda shrugged. Usually only immediate family or legal guardians received unrestricted visitation. Legal guardians. The words echoed inside my head. Could someone be listed by mistake? She shook her head. Not back then. I thanked her and walked outside into the afternoon sun. Legal guardian? That couldn't be right. Could it? On the drive home, my phone rang. Margaret Sloan. "I expected you'd have questions." "I have nothing but questions." "I know. I found hospital records." "I assumed you would." "They treated Harold like family." A long silence followed. Then she quietly replied. "Sometimes, family isn't defined by birth certificates." I gripped the steering wheel. "What aren't you telling me?" "I made a promise." "To who?" "To Harold." "And that promise is worth keeping even now?" "Yes." Her answer came instantly. "But promises have limits." "What does that mean?" "It means there is one person Harold believed should tell you the truth." "Who?" Another pause. "Mrs. Evelyn Carter." "I don't know that name." "You wouldn't." "Where is she?" Margaret gave me an address nearly 2 hours away. A small town called Millbrook. "Who is she?" "She was there the day everything changed." Before I could ask another question, she added. "And Ethan?" "Yes?" "Bring the birthday card." The call ended. That evening I packed the archive box into my truck. Before leaving, I opened it once more to make sure everything was inside. That's when I noticed something I had completely missed. The birthday card felt unusually thick. Carefully running my thumb along the inside cover, I realized the paper had been glued together. There was something hidden inside it. Very carefully, I separated the pages. A tiny folded photograph slipped into my lap. It showed a much younger Harold Bennett. He was holding the hand of a smiling little boy outside the same children's hospital. The boy couldn't have been older than 7. He was wearing a baseball cap and grinning at the camera. I recognized the face instantly. It was mine. On the back of the photograph, in Harold's handwriting, were 8 words that made my blood run cold. "Our last visit before they took you away." End of chapter 2. Chapter 3. I must have read those 8 words a dozen times before I accepted they weren't going to change. Our last visit before they took you away. Not before you got better. Not before you moved. Not before we lost touch. Before they took you away. Who were they? And why did those words sound less like a memory and more like a warning? I carefully placed the photograph back into the birthday card and started the drive to Millbrook before sunrise the next morning. The 2-hour trip gave me too much time to think. Maybe Harold had simply meant my parents had taken me home from the hospital. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But then I remembered my father's face when he saw the photographs. That wasn't the expression of a man remembering an old friend. It was the expression of someone watching a locked door slowly open. Millbrook was the kind of town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. One grocery store. One church. One gas station. The address Margaret Sloane had given me led to a small white farmhouse surrounded by oak trees. An elderly woman was watering flowers on the front porch. She looked up as I parked. "You must be Ethan." I stopped walking. "You were expecting me?" She smiled sadly. "Harold always believed you'd come eventually." Her name was Evelyn Carter. She had kind eyes and moved slowly with the help of a cane, but there was nothing uncertain about the way she looked at me. It felt as though she already knew me. Inside, the house smelled of fresh bread and old books. Family photographs covered nearly every wall. She poured 2 cups of tea before either of us spoke. Finally, she looked at the birthday card resting in my hands. "You brought it. You knew about this?" I helped Harold hide the photograph. A chill ran through me. "Why?" "Because he was afraid it would disappear. The way the other photographs disappeared?" She nodded once. "Yes." I took a deep breath. "I need the truth." Evelyn looked out the window for a long moment. "The truth rarely arrives all at once. I've noticed." She smiled faintly. "Then let's begin with something simple." She reached toward a nearby bookshelf and removed a faded photo album. Inside were dozens of pictures. Harold. My parents. Church picnics. Neighborhood cookouts. Fishing trips. Birthday parties. There were even pictures of Caleb and Nora as children. Harold wasn't an outsider. He had been woven into my family's life. "He was your father's closest friend," Evelyn said quietly. "For how long?" "Since they were teenagers." I stared at another picture. Dad and Harold looked inseparable. "What happened?" "They stopped speaking." "Why?" "I don't know the whole story." It was the same answer everyone gave. Nobody seemed to know everything. Everyone knew just enough to deepen the mystery. Evelyn carefully turned another page. My breath caught. There I was. About 6 years old. Sitting on Harold's shoulders at a county fair. I had no memory of that day. None. "You seemed happy," I whispered. "You adored him." "I don't remember him at all." "I know." "Why?" Her eyes filled with sadness. "Children sometimes forget after trauma." "Trauma?" The word settled heavily between us. "What happened to me?" She hesitated. "I think that's a question your parents should answer." I leaned forward. "Please." She shook her head. "I promised Harold I would never steal that chance from them." Instead, she stood and walked slowly toward an old wooden cabinet. From its bottom drawer, she removed a large envelope. "This belongs to you." Inside were newspaper clippings. Hospital fundraising events. Community picnics. Charity dinners. Harold appeared in nearly every article. One clipping caught my attention. The headline read, "Local businessman funds children's medical wing." There was Harold smiling beside hospital administrators. The date stopped me cold. It was the same year I had been hospitalized. "He donated millions," Evelyn said. "He never mentioned it?" "He wasn't the type." Another article listed donors who helped families pay for treatments. One name had been blacked out with thick marker. Someone had intentionally covered it. Who did this? "I don't know." I held the page toward the light. Beneath the marker, faint letters were still visible. The last name looked unmistakable. Walker. My family name. "You think my parents received money?" "I didn't say that." "But you wondered." She didn't answer. Silence was becoming its own language. Hours passed. We talked about Harold's kindness. His habit of remembering birthdays. How he secretly repaired neighbors' homes when they couldn't afford contractors. How he'd leave groceries on porches without signing his name. The more I learned, the less the inheritance made sense. Why leave $47 million to me? Not a charity. Not distant relatives. Me. A maintenance technician he'd supposedly barely known. Unless he hadn't barely known me. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Evelyn walked me to the front porch. I wish I could tell you everything. So do I. She reached into her sweater pocket. I almost forgot. She handed me a small brass key attached to a faded leather tag. The tag read only. Storage 214. What opens with this? I've never seen the unit. Then why do you have the key? Harold mailed it to me 3 weeks before he passed away. And he told you to give it to me? Only after you came looking. Where is it? She handed me a folded receipt. The storage facility was less than 15 minutes away. He left one instruction. What was it? She looked directly into my eyes. Don't take your parents. The storage facility manager checked my identification before leading me down a long hallway. Unit 214 stood at the very end. Dust covered the lock. No one had opened it in years. My hand shook as I inserted the brass key. It turned smoothly. The metal door rattled upward. The room was small. Barely the size of a walk-in closet. Inside were neatly stacked boxes. A wooden desk. Several filing cabinets. And against the back wall, a large framed family portrait covered by a white sheet. My pulse quickened. Why would someone store a portrait for decades? Slowly, I pulled away the sheet. The frame nearly slipped from my hands. It wasn't just a family portrait. It was my family. My parents. Caleb. Nora. Me. And standing beside us with one hand resting gently on my shoulder. Harold Bennett. Not as a guest. Not standing off to the side. He was positioned exactly where a member of the family would stand. At the bottom of the frame, engraved on a small brass plaque, were 5 words that shattered everything I thought I knew. The Bennett Walker Family, Spring 1998. Chapter 4. I stood frozen in front of the portrait until the storage facility manager called from the hallway. Everything okay in there? I swallowed hard. Yeah, just give me a minute. The metal door rolled halfway down behind him, leaving me alone again. I looked at the photograph more carefully. It wasn't a casual snapshot. It was a professional family portrait. Everyone was dressed in matching colors. My mother was seated in the center. Dad stood beside her. Caleb leaned against Dad's shoulder. Nora sat on the floor in front. I stood between my parents. And Harold Bennett. Not behind him. Not in front of him. Beside him. His hand rested naturally on my shoulder, and I was smiling up at him with the kind of smile a child gives someone they completely trust. I had absolutely no memory of that day. Yet my face showed nothing but happiness. Someone had erased an entire person from my childhood. I searched the rest of the unit. Every box was labeled in Harold's neat handwriting. Medical records. Financial documents. Photographs. Correspondence. Personal. I started with the photographs. Hundreds of them. Birthday parties. Camping trips. School plays. Christmas mornings. In picture after picture, Harold was there. Sometimes beside my father. Sometimes talking with my mother. Sometimes kneeling next to me. There were far more pictures of Harold with me than with anyone else. It wasn't subtle. Whoever had removed him from my family's history had done it carefully. Every photo at my parents' house had disappeared. Only these remained. The second box held letters. Most were addressed to Harold. Some were from charities. Others from old friends. One envelope had never been opened. Across the front were my father's unmistakable handwriting and just 3 words. Return to sender. There was no stamp. No mailing label. Only Harold's name. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single-page letter. Harold. I can't keep doing this. Every time Ethan asks about you, we have to lie. I know why we agreed, but it's getting harder every year. Maybe someday he'll understand. Maybe he'll hate us. Either way, I don't see another choice. Daniel. Daniel. My father's first name. I read the letter again. The words weren't angry. They were exhausted. The letter raised a terrifying possibility. My parents hadn't forgotten Harold. They had chosen to hide him. But why? I sat at the old wooden desk for nearly an hour, sorting papers into piles. Receipts. Insurance forms. Tax records. Nothing explained the inheritance. Then I opened a thin folder marked school. Inside were copies of my elementary school report cards. Not the originals. Photocopies. The teacher comments stopped me cold. Ethan asks thoughtful questions and enjoys solving problems. Excellent reading comprehension. One of the most curious students in class. Shows remarkable creativity. I blinked. These weren't the comments I'd grown up hearing. Every family story painted me as the child who struggled. The child who couldn't keep up. The dumb one. Yet every report described someone else entirely. Someone bright. Someone eager to learn. Someone teachers believed in. Had they all been wrong? Or had my family rewritten the story of who I was? My phone buzzed. It was Nora. I hesitated before answering. Hey. Ethan. Mom's been crying all afternoon. I looked around the storage unit. I'm not surprised. Where are you? Out. You found something, didn't you? I didn't answer. Ethan? I found proof that Harold was part of our family. Silence. Then Nora whispered something that caught me off guard. I always wondered. You, what? When I was little. What do you mean? There was a photograph. My heart skipped. I remember seeing it once. The family portrait? I don't know if it was the same one. What happened to it? I asked Mom who the man was. And? She took the picture away. Nora's voice became softer. That night I heard Mom and Dad arguing. What did they say? I only remember one sentence. What sentence? We promised we'd never let Ethan know. After hanging up, I couldn't concentrate. Nora had remembered something. Not much. But enough to confirm this wasn't my imagination. There had been a promise. A deliberate secret. One centered around me. Before leaving, I checked the last filing cabinet. Most drawers contained neatly organized documents. The bottom drawer was locked. Not with a keyhole. With a small combination dial. I searched the desk. Nothing. The boxes. Nothing. Then I noticed a folded piece of paper taped underneath the desktop. 3 numbers. 7219. I turned the dial carefully. Click. The drawer slid open. Inside rested only one item. A thick manila envelope. Across the front, Harold had written. To be opened only if Ethan finds his way here. I slowly opened it. Inside were several pages clipped together. The first page wasn't a letter. It was a legal document. Across the top, in bold letters, were the words. Guardianship Agreement. My eyes scanned the names. Harold Bennett. Daniel Walker. Sarah Walker. Then I reached the line that made my hands begin to shake. Minor child, Ethan James Walker. I turned the page, desperate to understand. Halfway down, one sentence had been highlighted. In the event that Harold Bennett becomes permanently unable to fulfill his responsibilities. I stopped breathing. Responsibilities? What responsibilities? I flipped through the remaining pages, but the final section, the one explaining the agreement, had been removed. Not torn accidentally. Cut cleanly with a blade. Someone had